Research shows great camp experiences help kids grow, building independence, social awareness, and deeper friendships. Great programming starts with a great schedule. Camptivities build schedules around your camp's rules so every camper has that high-quality experience. Learn more at camptivities.com. Welcome to the pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you already know about summer camp. I'm Dr. Mandi Baker. My pronouns are she, her.
And I am Travis Allison, he, him.
Today we're talking to Dr. Mary Breunig. That's she, her. She's an associate professor in the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Administration. We know Mary through her research and leadership in outdoor education, and I've had the privilege of being able to work with Mary on a project that I co-edited. So, Mary, let's kick off with the beginnings. How did you become a researcher and a professor? How did you get here?
Yeah, so let me just start by acknowledging that I'm on the ancestral lands of the Nisenan, Patwin, Wintu, and Maidu peoples. I always like to just take a moment to do an ancestral land acknowledgement. I have moved to California and now live here and have lived here for 6 years. I came to this discipline incredibly experientially. I don't have any degrees in this. My degrees are primarily in education, but I actually went to school on a scholarship for flute. So I had a full ride.
Amazing.
Play
So
flute
good.
and be a flute performance major. And I used to spend about 8 hours a day in a practice room in a very isolated, not a very social sort of environment. And I started to work in the outdoors when I was head of the water ski program for a camp in Wisconsin called Campfires Trail, because I was trying to find some balance to all my flute playing. So I started to teach water skiing at a summer camp. And we had a really scattered group of fifth graders in my cabin. And they sent us off on a 3-day river trip on the Flambeau River in northern Wisconsin. And it was this remarkable experience of watching people come together and build community and transcend their differences and start to communicate in new and really thoughtful and generous ways with each other because the environment was uncomfortable and stressful.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, what is this? What's happening out here? And what a beautiful way to teach and grow humans. And so that is how I started. And then I ended up getting a scholarship for an undergraduate honors thesis that I wrote and bought a one-way ticket to Kathmandu, Nepal. And
Sure. Yeah, as you do.
as one does. And the
Yes.
Gulf War broke out while I was there. So I
Holy.
started to move my way out of Muslim countries and found out they were hiring people at Outward Bound Australia. And this was like the late 80s, 89, 90.
Yeah.
They were hiring people at Outward Bound Australia and particularly looking for female instructors. So I just offered to give this thing a go without having a whole lot of knowledge, to be honest. And it took.
Yeah. But that obviously meant that you came back into your studies at some point and kind of tracked your way through to now. Where'd you study? What'd you do? How did you get here?
When I got back to the States after that extensive trip, there was a company that was working really closely with Outward Bound Australia in Minneapolis. And so I moved to Minneapolis and started to work for the company Wilderness Inquiry that leads integrated trips for people with disabilities and people without disabilities. And then I met people that had outdoor recreation degrees. And I was like, whoa, this is actually a field of study. Like
You can go to school for that?
be in this.
Uh-huh.
And to this day, my students say, you're not a rec professor or a leisure professor, you're a sociologist. And I'm like, I kind of am a sociologist. But I went back to get my master's in experiential education at that point with Jasper Hunt at Mankato, and then went on to get my PhD in education at Lakehead with Connie Russell, because this ended up becoming, an intellectual pursuit for me to just kind of unpack and uncover a little bit what was happening out there, but always with a focus on social and environmental justice. So I've had time as a graduate program director of a social justice program at Brock University in Canada.
Yeah.
And I ran a $1 million transdisciplinary research institute. So people see me either as a recreation and leisure professor, but more often see me as a social justice educator who just happens to be working in a department of recreation.
Yeah.
But interestingly, our department closed 2.5 weeks ago. And so I'm now a kinesiology professor.
Right.
And my 91-year-old mother is like, how do you spell that?
Right.
And then what is it?
Yes.
GYM, Mom. I'll tell you spell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. So it's been an
Wow.
interesting trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you've also kind of approached it with a sense of curiosity and adventure, like a willingness to just go, all right, let's find out. Like, let's see how
kind of
this
like
goes.
being on a trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Indeterminacy.
Yeah. Fair enough. Wow. Very cool.
It is. And Birch Trail, I'm huge fans of theirs and have done a lot of work with Birch Trail. So I know Giraffes, and yeah, that's a fun little crossover for me.
In what capacity?
I work with Gabe.
Yeah.
I assume the son of who you were working for.
Yeah.
Not make any guesses on
You're right.
podcast. So I worked with Gabe for 10 years as a consultant. We did a whole bunch of really cool projects together. I've always loved, Gabe in particular, but I also worked with Barb a bit, and just his capacity for, what do you got, Travis? What do you want to try that's fun? And so it was great doing work with them.
Great. I really see them as being the people that, like Barbara and Richard Chernoff.
Yeah.
I dedicated an outdoor leadership textbook that I wrote to them. I really do see them in those seminal years as really launching me into this career and really forming. Camp for me was just a huge way to form myself as an adult. Like I just became an adult at camp in a way that I don't know that I would have at the same rate or in the same way if I hadn't had camp. And I recently was on their website and saw their really creative videos, and I'm not sure if you've had a hand in any of that, but it's really cool.
I co-wrote one of their videos, their family video. Yeah, and co-produced it.
Nostalgic, and just went on the website, and I was like, "What's up with Campbridge Trail these days?"
Yeah, they do fun things. That's a great crossover. So, Mary, can you take us into what your current research is and what you driven to study and obviously write about them?
Yeah, well, what am I currently doing? Part of why I left an administrative position to come to primarily an undergraduate teaching institution was to have better work-life balance, which I have. And in many ways, I feel like I have a body of knowledge that exists that I get called upon to do consulting with, and a podcast like this, some writing as a mentor to new faculty, maybe mentoring graduate students. I recently did a lecture for the University of Edinburgh incoming graduate student cohort. I was recently at Gonzaga University doing a 2-day workshop on decolonizing our praxis. And in terms of new writing, I have not done a great deal of it, and I quite welcome that opportunity. I'm heading into the Sierras, into the backcountry tomorrow to go backpacking for 4 days just as a personal trip. I have room in my life to do all of that again. And I would say that there's 2 pieces of conceptual writing that I'm mulling on. So I would say I'm mulling on things more than anything. Yeah. One of them is having moved from Canada to the largest state school system in the United States. We have 26 schools in the California State University system. And I've never in my life experienced this type of, I've been talking about neoliberalism in education, but I'm living it. This type of the environment that is so policy driven and so bureaucratic. And I'm grateful to Sac State, so don't get me wrong. But even just waking up every day to hear that Judith Butler from the University of California, Berkeley was put on a watch list by President Trump for being anti-Semitic. I'm disturbed. I'm deeply disturbed at what's happening in the U.S. And I'm disturbed at the ways that universities are folding to these neoliberal. It's even worse than that. It's a disturbing time. So I'm just toying around with trying to do something playful with that as opposed to despairing with that.
Right. Yeah.
Like, where are the places where I have spheres of influence, and where are the communities of practice that I can build around me?
Yeah.
And I'm now on the faculty senate executive at the university here, and I'm a faculty senator. So I feel like I have greater agency in that conversation, and I'm seeing different perspectives and working with really interesting folks on those higher level committees. So I'm playing around with a conceptual piece around that maybe does a little bit of contrasting with my experience in Canada, although it sounds like Ontario may be facing similar challenges.
Yeah.
And then the other piece I'm playing around with is I'm on a kickball team. I live in this really great neighborhood that is really community oriented. And I joined a kickball team and I'm like the den mother of the kickball team. Like when they're sick, like when the 20 and 30-year-olds are sick, they're like, can you please, can you make us some chicken soup or this or this? And then it's actually gotten to the point now where I was like, I hate to admit this, but can one of you pop by the house to open a jar? They're like, absolutely, we got it. Or like come and lift heavy things or help me like insert a bench in the front yard. The sense of community around kickball is profound. We have a queer kickball league in Sacramento that's composed of about 60 people. We have this little neighborhood kickball league that has 6 teams on it. And there is something happening with schoolyard kickball there's this major resurgence in it. And the chair of my department is on my kickball team.
Right.
And she is a kinesiology professor. Right. And so I'm proposing that we look into this around sense of community and group cohesion and how we build community relevant to recreational sport.
Very cool.
Give yourself a huge helping hand this summer with Michael Brandine's 5 Fingers of fantastic staff training. Without the need to travel and from the comfort of your home or office, you can gain control of your staff training prep through his interactive and engaging online seminar. Michael's annual Brandwine on Training, the step-by-step system for planning and presenting your best staff training ever, isn't a boring webinar. Michael uses the same techniques and tools from his in-person trainings in a virtual space, bringing folks together from all around the world. Join Michael in ACA Illinois this March 26 and 27. Learn more about this and other Michael Brandwine seminars at ACA Illinois at acail.org/Michael Brandwine. Hurry, early bird rates end the 1st of February. The American Camp Association, the Impact Study, shows that high-quality camp experiences build independence, social awareness, and a love for nature, and that campers leave with deeper friendships and a stronger sense of community. Those outcomes start with great programming, and great programming starts with a great schedule. Camptivities build schedules with your camp's unique scheduling rules, ensuring every camper gets a consistent, engaging experience that fosters these proven benefits. Turn research into reality at camptivities.com. Don't wait until the new year. Now is the time to find a better way to schedule and save 15% for the first year. Camptivities would love to show you the next big thing in camp. Visit camptivities.com to set up a time to chat and let them help you get away from your desk and back out to camp.
Hey, do you pick up or would you ever play with the two of those together? Sometimes I wonder if the kickball is its own sort of glue or the magnet because of the neoliberalism, because of the way that the United States is sort of living in this
interesting
reality. Like
sort of like if we think about the Putnam book, Bowling Alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that it makes me think about that. Yeah, like it's
okay. So for folks listening, Mary, I need you to break a few things down. Can you explain neoliberalism so folks who may not have ever heard that term can make sense out of it? And then we can introduce Putnam. We should probably explain Putnam.
Okay, and maybe we could have it be a conversation, neoliberalism. But to me, it's this idea that greater controls are being exercised externally and at the governmental level around teaching and learning environments. And so it's inhibiting our academic freedom in many ways because there's a real top-down push with a real kind of capitalist-oriented mindset around the fact that we're providing a product to students and we should be providing it with a certain sort of framing and with a real outcomes-oriented modality, as opposed to just the idea of developing critical thinking skills and analytical skills in students, and really that focus on what it looks like to have a liberal education.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I suppose I explain neoliberalism in the same sort of way, but it's a head think. And it's a head think that's a product of a number of decades of head thinks that have grown stronger. And capitalism is one of those head thinks. But what it's kind of said to education is that education is a product, a bit like a factory or creating a car, like Fordism, where people come in one end, they pay their money, they walk out the other with the degree. but they arguably are passive agents in it, that they're not actively involved, where education to me requires active engagement from the learner. Not just the teacher, and definitely the teacher should be engaged, but the learner also has to actively engage to be able to hold that knowledge in their head. And universities, I would say for decades, we've been headed this direction, but the United States is like this whole new level with that top-down, we will tell you exactly what you can and cannot talk about in a university.
And the pulling of grant funding. And it feels like an environment that's really at risk right now. Now, before we get to Putnam, I do want to say one other thing about what I'm spending time on, because it's not just writing and mulling. It's my students. Part of what brought me to Sac State, as opposed to other universities when I made the transition from Canada, was I teach primarily students of color. We're a Hispanic serving institution. We're the first Black honors college in the United States. And my students are primarily students of color, first generation, and then many of them undocumented. So it's been very interesting for me to be in a place that has really progressive politics overall in the United States, because California's got very progressive politics to other parts of the United States. But in this environment where there is so much grassroots work that I can do to help support student success who have been historically disenfranchised in the United States.
Yeah.
And one of the things that deeply disturbs me right now, I'm having a much harder time, because Mandi probably knows that, like, when I go to Gonzaga, I'm working with primarily white upper middle class students at a lot of the universities, and that was true in Canada as well for me. So teaching social justice as a white colonizer to that demographic is one thing, because it can be really eye-opening for them, because we're confronting similar issues. I was in the classroom yesterday teaching Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Knapsack of Privilege and talking about biases and privilege and oppression with primarily students of color. And I ended up finishing class probably 15 or 20 minutes early, which never happens, because I feel like I can no longer teach students of color with this level of when I think of their complex lives.
Yeah.
And so many of my students live in multi-generational homes. They have guardians, not parents. They work full time. School is an afterthought. They're just trying to elevate like their lives slightly.
Yeah.
And then to be sitting there as a white colonizer teaching about culture and race and class and gender is like soul disruptive. Like my soul, I was like, I cannot. I've got 7 students in like the 95th percentile that are Black honors college students who should be teaching this class.
Yeah.
And
they could teach it from personal experience, right?
Yes.
Rather than like a come to learning later on. They could speak from the moment they were young about these experiences.
This is a good example of the neoliberal piece. I don't know at this point if I should refuse to teach this class, which I do have expertise to teach, and insist they put a faculty of color in, or if I just keep rolling along with this. And the challenge is most of our tenure track people are white.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a giant contrast between the demographics of the university and the general mission of the university, but then what's actually happening. So it's a really, there's a lot of, it's a challenge. It's an internal.
It's very dynamic and constantly moving. And it probably worth saying the risk is if you refuse to teach the class in order to create and hold space for a person of color to take it up, there's also the risk that will be a contract, a sessional, and after one season, one term, one semester, the university will collapse the course.
Yep.
But if Mary holds the position, and I'm trying to explain the politics of a university, if Mary holds the position because of her tenure, because of her permanency, she'll be able to hold the course open. So there's times where you know you might not be the right person to speak for the thing, but because of your privilege, you stay there so that you can hold it against the kind of tidal wave of shutting courses, any courses about social justice down. And that's kind of the reality of some of this real top-heavy governance. Get rid of everything that says DEI. Get rid of anything that has to do with social justice. You're just going to sort of pretend that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Kind of terrifying. Yeah. Putnam. Did you know there's a Netflix? There's a Netflix doco called Join or Die. It's an hour-long explaining Putnam's theory and how he predicted how the United States would head this way over bowling, no less. Anyways, I'll leave you to explain Putnam.
So you may know more than I do because it's been a long time since I've read it. So you might be able to provide a better synopsis. But my memory of it is that we are no longer bowling in bowling leagues together.
Right.
People are
Yeah.
going and bowling alone. And that
Yes.
this
Right.
is like setting off this trend where we are devolving community and leisure experiences as part of that.
Yeah. And Putnam positions leisure as being the center of community. We come together over things that we just enjoy collectively, and that helps us sort of knit together, weave together those collectives into these communities, much like your kickball, which is the part that made me giggle. Kickball, let's do it. Let's do more of it. And Putnam sort of traced the deterioration of people joining clubs, groups, sports, recreational sports, not competitive ones, recreational sports. But he also traced, along with this bowling thing, he looked at like the Freemasons, the Kiwanis clubs, like all of these sort of community-oriented, voluntary committee type sort of stuff, and watched the numbers just drop. He tracked it, good old bar graph, and tracked it and watched the numbers drop. And he predicted, he said, as this deteriorates, so will our form of governance in the United States. We will have folks at the top that are self-motivated and will demonstrate how to live in a self-fulfilling, self-motivated way rather than a consideration of community or collective. And it's going to be crappy, is basically what he said. And he said that in the 70s. And here we are 50 years later. And it's almost to the T what he predicted based on just watching like bowling club leads go down, which is mind-blowing. So when the Netflix doco came out, I think it was about a year ago, it was just like perfect timing. Of course it was. These things aren't coincidental. But it was like, yeah, that's right. We need to get back to Putnam and keep coming back to the notion of community and how that works and why that matters in its ripple effect up as well as across and down. Fascinating.
And tell me the name of the Netflix again.
It's called Join or Die.
Well, okay.
Like a little
That's
extreme. But that's
Thanks.
basically what he's trying to say is like community life will die. It will. And if it hasn't already.
Well,
Look, I think we've gone off on a few tangents here. So, Mary, can you help our listeners understand maybe some of the differences or how outdoor education relates to camp, but might be different than how they're running camp or how they're thinking about camp?
yeah, I never went to camp as a kid. My family couldn't afford it, which is why when I suddenly got to camp as a counselor, I was like, oh, because I was like, outdoor education is just to me embedded in the whole ethos of camp. Like it's embedded in like, and not just outdoor education activities, but the idea that we're building community, we're building group cohesion, we're gaining a sense of place, we're gaining care for the environment that we're in, we're gaining a care for each other. And to do that over long periods of time, like Birch Trail was either 4 weeks or 8 weeks, there was no other option, was really, it was remarkable what would happen with those groups. I mean, as a counselor, I left as wrecked as the campers. I kept my yellow Ralph Lauren polo shirt that I wore to Campfires in my closet with the smell of campfire smoke when I started my school year as a university student because I just wanted to prolong that experience to every extent possible. And I think outdoor education does that for us as well, both at the university level and in the trips we take with the university students, but also through all the organizations that really do have an education-oriented framework. I recently went on a guided trip to Mongolia. I did a fat tire mountain biking trip in Mongolia, and it was guided. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why somebody didn't do something at the beginning to help us grow as a bond of the group.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's the difference between guiding and education.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to want to be I was like, oh, this could be so much more transformative for some people. But it was like, oh, no, I'm just going to go along with it. But what an interesting way to approach this, as opposed to summer camps and outdoor education really have that education-oriented mindset.
Yeah.
I also saw it with a graduate student one time who started to work for an outdoor organization in Toronto that was a for-profit. So if we think about for-profit versus non-for-profits, right?
Yeah.
As a for-profit, she suddenly realized she was not in the business of educating anymore. She was in the business of trying to support a for-profit organization. And so she would hire people and try to coach her boss that with the right kind of mentoring, she thought these individuals that started work for the company could really flourish. And her boss sort of said, we're not in the business of helping people flourish. We're in the business of making money, which again is a real contrast. Summer camps are for profit in some ways, but they kind of also hold that non-for-profit ethos that I think outdoor education does.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's such a good distinction. I never thought of that. For profit, not for profit.
Then my camp management brain just gets so frustrated because like your job selling your for-profit business could be so much easier if you just cared a tiny bit more for the people who are in your programs. Yeah, I know of a camp who boasts about having a camper retention rate of in a 20% year over year, and they see themselves as super businessy. They don't care that the retention rate is so low because they can bring them in through Google Ads and they can just get more kids. It's like, but it's sure, like you can move more widgets through your machine, or you could do one tiny little bit thing and it wouldn't cost you as much to move. Anyway, there you go.
And do developmental work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Progressively
just a tiny bit of
developmental
caring
work.
would be all it would take.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you was do a case study that you did with Hannah Dabrowski about extroversion and introversion of staff at camp. Can you walk through where that came from and what was involved in the study?
Yeah, so one of the things that I study and mull on is the hidden curriculum in outdoor education.
Yeah.
Like when we're walking around with all these fancy stickers of places we've been on our water bottles, when we're beta one-upping each other with the climbs that we've done, the technical clothing that we wear. I think about that sort of podcast or that little YouTube channel that was like stuff that white people like as an example. Or I think about like working at a summer camp one time where we were doing dream catchers with no analysis of the fact that we're like co-opting that from indigenous culture.
Yeah.
And for me, this introversion, extroversion is a piece of that hidden curriculum.
Yeah.
Because I do think that the people that tend to flourish in our discipline are the people that have a high verbal acuity and have like a fairly high level of enthusiasm and even sort of like a cheerleader kind of rah-rah, sis boom boss sort of ethos about them.
Yeah.
And I had a student who was really introverted, but was exceptional and was like in the top 2% of students that I taught. And every time I had to do a reference call for them, the person that was calling me was like, are you really sure? Because they really didn't sell themselves.
They're really
like,
quiet.
Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful that they're not overselling themselves? They're actually underselling themselves.
Yeah.
Like, you have my word, this person will bring their A+ game to every single thing, but they will be thoughtful, methodical, maybe a little slower, maybe little less verbal, but they have got a skill set that is really going to lend themselves to this profession. And so in the case study, she and I played around with this idea of like, what are we doing when we're training so many people in the same vein and people that are probably in the end overselling themselves and probably should be carrying a little bit more humility into their practice and into what they may be able to offer. And so we had this idea in mind for quite a while. And then when we saw that call for a special issue, we're like, oh, now's the time. And that's someone who also works a lot in summer camps. And she used to be the director of a summer camp. And she found the same thing there, that parents weren't always completely convinced of her capacities because she wouldn't oversell a point. She would be very realistic about what the experience was going to be like and what she could offer. And I really came to appreciate and value that in her.
And it's such a great camp perspective. So being part of a co-director team with one extrovert and one introvert, I learned so much because I like that whole be in front of everybody at camp thing gave me so much joy. But being with someone who became a true partner, eventually life partner, realizing how much those folks had to offer to the greater percentage of kids who are quiet and needed a place, which was me when I was a kid. Like I became brought out of my shell by camp people, but just realizing it's like there are particular counselors that I can picture who were quiet, who would sometimes do a skit, they get pulled into things and we're totally great about it, but you wanted them working with kids. And we did everything we could to clear the decks to make sure that they wouldn't have to go into some sort of summer management role, because they enjoyed working with kids, and the quiet kids responded so well to them. And it was so important to us to be part of our structure that those kids would feel comfortable at camp too.
Yeah, I think those still small voices in our field just have so much to offer, but we need to hold space for them to be able to have room to exercise their voice.
Do you think there's a recruitment fog that when camp folks, leaders are in the recruitment phase, that the woo-woo and the rah-rah is really easy to go, yeah, they're going to be fine at camp, let's hire them? And if there's a fog, what would you advise to those recruitment folks? What should they look for? How do they assess in a different way the diversity that's showing up?
Well, I don't know what it looks like anymore because I only know it from the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
And I know it's not camping in the 80s anymore. We did some crazy stuff then that really, barely probably survived those things. I think about even talking with this former student when she went to work for this organization in Toronto. And I think about this through both a diversity lens. I think about this broadly as what would it look like to have the complement we're looking for at summer camp that would offer diverse perspectives and appeal to a diversity of students, whether it's introversion, extroversion, cultural, skin color, gender orientation, sexuality. I mean, these are all things. I actually encouraged her to stop recruiting from within rec programs and to start recruiting within education and business at the community college. I was like, there are some really fine people in leadership roles or that are poised to be in leadership roles that we're not thinking about because our brains are immediately orienting ourselves to the fact that they should come out of an outdoor recreation program. I think it's far easier to train the skills needed to work in those environments than it is to retrain somebody's attitude. And so I think just broadening recruitment in general, and we're not looking for people maybe even that have a strong even outdoor background, or we balance a strong outdoor background with people that have a different sensibility or have a different cultural background that can lend itself to a more inclusive environment generally.
Very cool. Well, our next question for you is, what's on the horizon for you? It sounds like you're heading bush short term, but long term, what are the next couple of things on the go?
Sabbatical.
Nice.
Which will involve a lot of travel.
Yeah.
More kickball. A lot of time with my 91 and 92-year-old parents who are just a source of inspiration for me. A lot of time listening to my students.
And it sounds like you have some interesting leadership ahead of you as, a senator in a university, and like you said, listening to your students, and then how does that translate in terms of how do we govern and how do we lead in these really unusual times?
Yeah. And just continuing to stay slow, the slow pedagogy.
Yes.
I think we should all read this book. I used it for my outdoor education textbook during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was called The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. It's about a woman who ends up bedridden, and a friend of hers brings a violet plant in, and there's a snail in the violet plant, and she becomes so curious about the snail. She does all these explorations. So my students and I started to call it being snail-like. And their parents, they're like, what are you supposed to be doing? And they're like, I'm supposed to hand make a kite and try to fly it. And they're like, that's what you're doing in class today? And the students were like, yes, that is what we're doing in class today. And so parents all around Sacramento during the pandemic were starting to create little outdoor nooks for their students because we were reading this book and reading to each other. And I now have a statue of a snail in the front yard only for the last week. And I get a lot of people are really happy to have a snail in the neighborhood. And I'm using it as a reminder to just continue to stay slow and mindful and really present.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Mary, when you think about the outdoor recreation and camp industries, what do you think is not being studied enough?
That's a great question. So one of my friends did a study on counselors, the impact on counselors, which I thought was really interesting because we had been studying campers for so long that I think there are some areas in there that still need to be explored, like the transformative experiences for counselors.
Yeah.
I think we always need to be thinking. I'm also a National Outdoor Leadership School instructor, and I think we pride ourselves on thinking that we're giving students transformative experiences that transfer back to their home environments.
Right.
I don't think we're doing enough longitudinal work with that to really
Okay.
see like what things stick.
Yeah.
Like I did a longitudinal study on integrated environmental studies programs in Ontario. And it was really pretty interesting to see like which practices stuck after they left the program. I was asked to do it by the government of Ontario because they were trying to bring environmental education back as a secondary school teachable. And we were just assuming that the behaviors and attitudes that they experienced in the program transferred into their daily life and then stuck. And then we found out they didn't because there wasn't continuity. And so what kind of continuity can we provide, I think, so that we're not just assuming that the work we're doing is good, but we're actually continuing to do studies that explore that.
Yeah.
And our last question for you today is there a researcher you'd recommend we should talk to next?
So the friend that did do you know Jeff Jacobson? He's no longer in academia. He was the one who did the study on the camp counselors. I would at least reach out to him. He was at San Luis Obispo. He was also in California. I'm not sure. I think he's now a camp director.
Okay, find him. We can talk about
Yeah, for sure.
And then you know what? I think I would talk to Hannah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I would talk to
She's
Hannah.
at Brock,
'Cause
yeah.
Hannah's also partnered. She's at Brock. And then she's also partnered with a woman who's a camp counselor. So you might even want to interview the two of them together.
All right.
Ah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I think that would be really interesting because one of the things that she's noticed is that there's a decline in campers since the pandemic.
Yep.
Mm.
And so I
there was
think actually that might be a really interesting conversation to have.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it sounds great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. We'll
Really
we'll
appreciate
track those down.
it. And so, Mary, is there a place that people can go to find your research? Which is interesting because we had a funny off-camera discussion about how easy or hard it is to find your research. But where can
Yeah.
people go to find more about
It's
you?
not easy anymore because I used to have a website that had almost all my publications as open access. And I have decided I really do feel like I'm waning instead of waxing. And so I discontinued I just stopped publishing my website as well. I think that probably the best way to do it is just to Google my name and Google Scholar. I think it's probably the best way to.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
It's not a great answer. And it makes me wonder if I should probably have access to a website again, but I don't.
Well, it's not on the Google Scholar for sure.
Okay, great.
And how about if they want to follow up with you directly? Can we share your email?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Lovely. Thank you. Well, Mary, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fabulous conversation. Went off in all sorts of wonderful directions I didn't
All good
anticipate.
directions.
Yeah, I love it. And for listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you didn't know, now you know, Camp Pros.
Hey, Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, masterclass, from the Summer Camp Professionals group, a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, it'll encourage Camp Pros to keep freely sharing their ideas and make the camp industry as a whole better.